This episode is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the #1 seller of games and gaming accessories. And GatheringMagic.com, the #1 resource for Magic the Gathering news and articles.
My name is Uriah, and today I'll be featuring my All Creatures and Lands Animar Soul of the Elements Commander deck. This is my Animar Soul of the Elements deck, and for a 1/1 he's probably the most insane general that I've ever played. Even though he's a 1/1, he doesn't stay that way long, and I thought, let's build an all-creature Animar deck. That way it's not super abusive, right? Maybe it won't be too bad. Even with that, this deck gets out of control quick, and it's pretty crazy. So, since we have Animar who loves putting creatures in play and having creatures in play, we're going to play a lot of creatures. The only one drop I have on the deck is Ulvenwald Tracker. Since I don't have any targeted removal or any sorcerers or instants that remove cards, I got to use it all with my creatures, so that's why I have the Fight Bear in there. And since I don't have any mana rocks or any ways to fetch lands outside of creatures, I have a lot of creatures that do that. So we have Sakura-Tribe Elder, Sylvan Ranger, Coiling Oracle, which does land or in non-land, but it goes in my hand. We have Fauna Shaman, which is just a survival, which is good if I need to sort of toolbox out the best creature for the situation. I like to have at least 2 graveyard removal cards in my deck if possible. So one of those slots goes for Scavenging Ooze, which can remove problem cards and also get bigger and gain me some life as well. When Animar goes really big, I can use it to cast Savageborn Hydra and essentially pay all of the extra equal to the counters I have on Animar, which can make it pretty brutal because it does have double strike. So that's a pretty good card to use when I have a bunch of free mana with Animar. Burnished Hart gets me some more lands, Wood Elves, Grandpa, and Farhaven Elf. Mana War is really good because once I get up to at least 2 counters on Animar, for every blue mana I have, essentially I can put an additional +1/+1 counter on Animar just by bouncing Mana War back and forth to my hand. I use that quite a bit just to get Animar up really high really quickly. We have Fierce Empath to go get a big creature for whatever the situation calls for. Since I'm not playing any non-creature spells, the Heartwood Storyteller is going to be a great addition for this deck because it means my opponents will probably be sometimes playing non-creature spells, so I can go ahead and draw cards off that. We have Hua Tuo, Honored Physician. He's really great, sort of like a Genesis. Just activate it during your upkeep, put the creature in the graveyard you want on top of your library, and draw it. Witness is in there to get back stuff. Loaming Shaman is the other graveyard card I have in my deck. If someone else is really abusing their graveyard, my only option is going to be to play Loaming Shaman and just shuffle the entire thing back into their library. I do have all of the archetypes in here. Giving my creatures an additional bonus and taking away bonuses from other creatures is very useful, so I have Archetype of Aggression. Solemn gets me some more land, draws me a card eventually. Drum Hunter I really like a lot as well. I believe it was originally in the blue-green-red deck, the pre-con from 2011. It helps me out with mana a little bit in the early game, and then in the late game, which gets there really quick with Animar, it starts drawing me cards at the end of every turn, which is very nice. I have a couple of counter spells since I wanted some way to interact on other people's turns. So I have Mystic Snake and Venser. I also have Glenelendra Archmage here as well. And one of my pet cards is Lurgoth. So in a vacuum, not really the most powerful creature out there, but one of my favorites, and since I have a bunch of creatures, if a Wrath goes off and they all go to the bin, I can play this guy and he'll be pretty big. I have Anger to get up on my guy's haste if it's in the yard. Rooting Kabu is one of the ways that I've found to go ahead and sort of help myself after a board wipe if it happens. If I could go put him in the graveyard from play, I remove him from the game and then shuffle all creature cards from my graveyard into my library. Which probably will be almost my entire graveyard. I might have a land or 2 in there, but this lets me just reload all of my creatures and hope to draw them again. Species Gorger is a really powerful card. In fact, the next 3 cards are really powerful. It's a 6/6 on 5, and I have to return a creature to my hands every upkeep. So since Animar has such a deep discount with all those counters he's given out, I can go ahead and really abuse some come into play abilities pretty easy and for a low cost with Species Gorger, and he's a 6/6 to boot, which isn't that bad. Sages of the Anima is a really good card. Once I land it, I pretty much don't need any more land for the rest of the game. Once it's in play, I should have enough counters on Animar that all the creatures I'm drawing should be cheap enough that I can play them with whatever mana I have available. So essentially this just reads draw 3 cards every upkeep, which is pretty awesome. And then maybe the most busted card in this deck is Prophet of Kruphix. You'll see I could power this deck up a lot more than what it is. I just don't because I thought he would be strong enough already, Animar, and he is. But Prophet is just, it's ridiculous. I don't think it's, you know, bannable ridiculous, but it is a really, really good card that lets me just empty my hand. Maul Drifter for some card draw, I can evoke it early. Histrodon because the morph is free once Animar has 3 counters on it, and then drawing a card's pretty good. Garruk's Pack Looter for some more card draw. I have Perplexing Chimera because it's just a fun card. Since I can't cast any instants of sorceries, I'll let you cast your best one, and then I'll take it and give you a 3/3 in return. I also have Homeward Path in here as well, so as long as I'm not switching creatures around, Perplexing Chimera will keep on coming back to my hand, or to my side of the board, which is very good. I have Mischevious Quanar, kind of like a Perplexing Chimera, and then I can go ahead and fork an instant or sorcery if I unmorph it. Again, I can morph it for free once Animar is at least 3 counters, so it's cheap and good there as well. Indrik Stomphowler, get rid of pesky artifacts or enchantments. Acidic Slime for the same, plus lands. I have Genesis just to go ahead and regrow my good creatures on the upkeep. Rurik Thar is also a beating in this deck because I'm not going to play any spells that are going to cost me 6 damage, and my opponents are. So a 6/6 on 6, he has to attack each turn of table. That's really not such a big deal. You just send it at someone that's not going to be able to kill him, and then watch the 6 damage start racking up across the board. Another counter spell in Draining Whelk. Duplicate, usually for free, remove a creature. It's really powerful in this deck. Inferno Titan. It's great just because I can Fire Breathe. I don't have a ton of red sources in this deck, so the Fire Breathe in itself is really not that relevant. But just being able to, you know, Chain Lightning, or not Chain Lightning, but Arc Lightning when I attack when he comes into play, and then just having a 6/6, that's pretty powerful. Usually I'm going to be winning in the red zone, but with Bloodshot Cyclops, I can go ahead and throw a giant Animar or some other giant creature at someone's face if I just need a little bit more damage to end the game. So that's a pretty powerful card for me. Steel Hellkite, some great removal packaged onto that, especially for free if I have the 6 counters on Animar. Deadwood Treefolk, more ways to get creatures back from my graveyard. Soul of the Harvest, drawing cards is very important in this deck because there's not really a whole lot of it. So I had to pack as much as I could into this deck, and Soul of the Harvest is great. Play a creature, put a creature into play, and, you know, draw a card. Here's the Archetype of Imagination to give my guys flying. I have Wurmcoil, which is just a great attacker, blocker, whatever. I got Frosty in here as well. Lock down something, and again, get in for the 6/6 beats for essentially 2 mana. Spearbreaker is a concession to all the Wrath effects in Commander. Usually the creatures I want to save are going to be at least 5/5 or greater, Animar included, when I have this in play. So the most important thing is once I have this, and I suspect a Wrath might be coming, is just to leave up all of the lands I have available for as many creatures as I want to save. But this is a very important card and can definitely save the day. Balefire Dragon is a great way to get rid of most of the creatures on an opponent's side of the board once it deals damage. And doing that for essentially 2 red mana is pretty powerful. Diluvian Primordial, play instants or sorceries out of opponents' yards. Maelstrom Wanderer could be the other commander in this deck. I've never actually played him as the commander yet. It's something I could do in the future if Animar just gets too oppressive. And giving all your creatures haste is probably the best part of this card. Although, as you can see, most of the other spells that I've shown so far, all of them can be cascaded off of Maelstrom Wanderer. So it's really good value, you know, essentially for 3 mana. And Jester, kind of like Duplicant. Woodfall Primus for pesky non-creature permanents. Scourge of Kara Ridges gives me a big flyer, and then I can either go ahead and Pyroclasm or you know, deal a bunch of damage in the sky which I've never actually done. I've done the 2 damage to each creature without flying, but not the 6 damage to each creature with flying. Magmatic Force, normally you think, man, you have to pay that 3 red mana because you can't get it completely for free with Animar, but for me that's not really a big issue. To get a 7/7 that bolts every upkeep for 3 mana, I'll take it. Same with Tidal Force to twiddle every upkeep, 7/7 for 3 mana. It's pretty good, even though I gotta pay that 3 blue. Sphinx of Bethune is Fact or Fiction on a stick, just some more card draw, some more options there. Archetype of Endurance makes everything really hard to deal with once it hits the table, which is nice. And normally 8 mana, pretty expensive for this ability, but with Animar it could be 2 mana, which is very good. Akroma, she, if I want to play her as a morph, is pretty cheap, usually free. But because her morph cost is going to be more than what I would pay if I just hard cast her. If Animar has 5 counters, I usually just hard cast her instead. Colossus of Akros, that's usually cheap or free. And then I do have a Gaia's Cradle in here, so getting to that 10 mana to monstrous it isn't that difficult. Unfortunately, the Animar doesn't reduce the monstrous cost, which would be awesome. Last couple of creatures, I have Inkwell Leviathan, just really big, really hard to deal with. And Nullstone Gargoyle is very difficult. It's a 4/5 on 9, which usually means it's cheap or free. And then it says counter the first non-creature spell an opponent or anyone plays in a turn. Since I'm only playing creature spells, this is never going to counter anything that I have, and it's really going to be a pain for other people to deal with. Getting into the lands, because I don't have the mana rocks available, and I only have a certain number of creatures that can fetch me lands, I had to be very careful with how many lands I put in and how many colors of each land. It actually took me a while to find the right balance of lands to creatures in this deck, but I think I've pretty well found the sweet spot for it right now. So I have a couple of 5-color lands in here. We have Command Tower, Ancient Ziggurat, which is amazing, Thran Quarry. Now sometimes if there is a Wrath that goes off, I will lose this land, but usually when I'm playing it turn 3 to get Animar out, it's going to stick around for at least a few turns in order to get Animar going and really get those counters up. I have Reflecting Pool for some 5-color options, or 3-color I should say. Opal Palace, really good because it adds counters for Animar if I have to recast him again, which I usually will because people will try to kill him because he's such a pain. And usually when it happens, if people kill him, it can be difficult to get back into the game, so this really helps out in that situation. A couple of the original duels in here, I have a Trop and a Taiga, and then the Rav duels, Breeding Pool, Stomping Ground, and Steam Vents. We have some filter lands in Flooded Grove, Cascade Bluffs, and Firelit Thicket. As you can see, not a lot of basics in this deck because my mana has to be so versatile to get all of the creatures I want out in play. Check lands, Rootbound Crag, Hinterland Harbor, and Sulphur Falls. We have a couple of temples with Temple of Mystery and Temple of Abandon. A couple of fetches to make sure I can get my land colors I need, Wooded Foothills and Misty Rainforest. This deck is very light on the red. It's very heavy green, somewhat heavy blue. So I only have one of the Karus in here, which is the Simic Growth Chamber. These are the 2 colors I want to make the most. I do have a Raging Ravine, a man land, just in case everything gets wiped and I need to start getting some damage in. The Cradle I mentioned earlier, which is really great in this deck, just to, make a bunch of green mana. Now, not a whole lot of green, spells that have like triple green or anything like that, but can still be very powerful. Some colorless utility lands in Winding Canyons. I had this and Alchemist Refuge in the deck, and I found it was overkill. I wasn't using them as much or even at all when they were both in play, and I still don't use this a ton. If Prophetic Fruitfix is in play, I'm going to be playing creatures flashing a lot. Sometimes, though, I'm just tapping out all my mana beforehand to play creatures, so Winding Canyons doesn't do a whole lot for me there. But in a pinch, it can be useful, so I've left it in. I have High Market, just go ahead and sack my creatures in case something bad's happening to them. I have Homeward Path to get all my creatures back in case they get stolen. Kessig Wolf Run, because eventually I'm going to go ahead and play out my hand and have no more creatures left to play and have some mana sitting on the board with nothing to do. So Kessig's really great for that, especially with Cradle in play. Maze of Ith, just as a concession to giant generals coming at me. And then I have 3 forests, 3 islands, and 2 mountains. Thanks for watching CMDR decks. Please subscribe and favorite.